So it's been interesting to watch the Groiper War unfold over the last couple weeks. Very interesting indeed. Ben Shapiro asked us why we care about the USS Liberty.
I have to say, I'm a little bit bewildered why you're so obsessed with an incident that is now 52 years old. If you have theories that are better than those of the American government, they've got operators standing by, feel free to dial them and tell them about your 5-decade-old theories about a military incident from the 1967 Six-Day War. It's of direct and vital interest now in 2019.
Oh, Ben. It was 52 years ago. Who cares about what happened to our soldiers fighting and dying in the Middle East? Just like they are still today. And guess what? I'm not a big fan of American blood still being spilled in that desert. And all that money spent on our bombs to blow people up there, have those bombs really made the lives of Americans any better? No, I don't think so. I think it's made our lives worse. But Benny Ben's priorities aren't Americans and America. He has a higher calling. But Benny talking about the USS Liberty, Charlie Kirk talking about the founding fathers, this stuff has really got me thinking. How important is historical argument? I mean, people in the United States, for example, believe that the poem on the Statue of Liberty, right, where it says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses," is some sort of quote from our founding fathers in support of multiculturalism. Of course it's not. The Statue of Liberty was given to us by France. It was completed and it was erected in, I think it's 1886. And nearly 20 years it stood there with no poem on it. That poem was written by a New York Jewish woman, Emma Lazarus, and she is considered a Zionist. Now, she died before Theodor Herzl really sort of, he's the father of Zionism, did his thing after she was already dead. The huddled masses she's talking about in that poem are the Russian Jews, right? She's not saying, "Give me your tired." She wants her tired. She was a Jewish nationalist. She didn't care about your poor huddled masses. She wanted her poor huddled masses. That poem was not here to welcome your Irish great-great-grandpa, your Norwegian great-uncle. She wrote it for her people. Now, this idea of America as a historical, great multi-ethnic experiment, it's very unique and wrong, right? It's a very wrong historical interpretation. It's an idea that some people have in their heads, and what do we do about that fact? It's in their heads. Now, you might watch this and say to me, "Hey, wait, I thought America is a great multi-ethnic experiment." Well, let's take a look at John Jay. He was a founding father. He was one of the very early abolitionists, right? He pushed very hard for abolition. He was the part of the New York Manumission Society. They boycotted merchants who supported the slave trade, among other things. Now, some people will point out he was very dedicated to our country. He wrote in the Federalist Papers. He was pushing pretty hard to end slavery starting in 1777. That was during the Revolutionary War. We didn't have a constitution yet. So someone could throw him up as an example. They'll say, "Oh, well, he believed in all men are created equal. He was an abolitionist." But what did he really say about our country? Let's take a look at Federalist Paper number 2, which he wrote. Quote, "With equal pleasure, I have as often taken notice that Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in their manners and customs, and who, by their joint counsels, arms, and efforts, fighting side by side throughout a long bloody war, have nobly established general liberty and independence." End quote. Our founding fathers had some hopes for us. Now, what would it mean to have people descended from the same ancestors? That's pretty obvious. But what about speaking the same language, same religion, same principles? He even pointed out that we lack diversity in our manners and customs. We are very similar in our manners and customs. The word for that is cohesion. Social cohesion is what makes people willing to cooperate with each other. We see each other as equals, right? Because we are actually more similar. The more similar we are to each other, the more trivial it is to like each other, to be friends, to be friendly, to cooperate. When you live in a very cohesive society, it's very easy to say things like, all men are created equal. But remember my last video where I talked about Singapore? It's not a cohesive society when you're likely to say that you don't want your children playing with the neighbor kids, or that the neighbors are not welcome over for dinner because of who they are. Now, there are more factors to social cohesion in research, the way it's measured. For instance, perceived corruption can really destroy the social cohesion metrics when they present it in research. But I think we can all see how, if you really want a country to be a single people, a cohesive group that works together, having a shared manner and a shared language might be important for making that a reality. I mean, press 1 for English. That's part of how you know social cohesion is breaking down. It might be a goofy example, but that's it. And now they're hiding that. Did you notice that? So if you don't know, there are 1-800 numbers in the United States. You call them toll-free. And they used to always be in English because, it's the United States. We speak English here. And then those 1-800 numbers started to change. Once you would call it, you would have to press 1 if you wanted to proceed with English, or 2 for Spanish. Now, some of these boomers who had been sitting idly by while their country filled up with illegal immigrants finally took notice. They, why are we selecting between 2 languages for an American toll-free phone line? They noticed that this is a breakdown in who we used to be. It's a genuinely bad thing. So did the boomers demand that the illegals be kicked out and our society be repaired? Not really. Those phone lines now, when you call them at the beginning, they just say quickly in Spanish, press 2 for Spanish. And if you press nothing after a second or two, it defaults to English. And I guess we've just taken less notice of it now. That's enough to placate us, apparently. Not as much outrage about it anymore. By the way, we still don't have a wall. But getting back to the main idea, how do we tackle these false notions in people's heads, these false historical notions? Well, why do people believe the stuff they believe? Well, someone out there, theoretically, could believe that the Founding Fathers were great as a fundamental premise, and also believe that the Founding Fathers wanted multiculturalism. And then when you come along and show them that the Founding Fathers didn't want multiculturalism, they adopt a new position of the Founding Fathers were great, and I don't like multiculturalism. That's probably not what's going to happen. Most people, as far as I can tell, use historical understanding completely as ex post facto justification for the stuff they want to believe, right? If they believe the Founding Fathers were great and wanted multiculturalism, you come around, prove them wrong. The Founding Fathers did not want multiculturalism. All you succeed in doing is convincing them that the Founding Fathers were bad. So I think on one level, especially in one-on-one conversations, I think you can simply attempt to argue the principles, argue the values, argue the grand ideas, ignore the false history that most people believe as much as you can, right? And as they warm up to the ideas, then you can start to give them historical support for the ideas. But at the end of the day, they believe in the ideas that they find most compelling. History is sort of secondary to them. Once they've warmed up to the ideas, maybe you can talk to them about Haiti, Rhodesia, South Africa, which is now happening, the rest of us pretty soon. Now, not everything is a one-on-one conversation, though. The Groyper War, debates might be coming up on the grand stage. History is a weapon on the debate stage. One person will invoke a history that supports their side, supposedly, and it's kind of like the other person's job to address that. They have to defeat the historical talking point in one way or another. If you fail to meet that historical talking point challenge, they can just beat you over the head with it. It can kind of look kind of bad. And it can make you look bad even if the historical narrative is false or misleading or irrelevant, if you can't answer it correctly. That's one of my least favorite things about debates. especially because, imagine you can just look over the last couple millennia over the entire Earth, a lot of it which has fairly scant, information about it. And then you can come up with this story and be like, see, multiculturalism worked on this island, or something like, oh, everyone got along well there, and because of their multicultural strengths, they became an important hub on the Silk Road. Like some really weird fringe narrative, historical theory that's probably totally BS. But if the person who's arguing is not ready to face that sort of challenge, the audience can be convinced, right? They can buy into this fringe historical interpretation. They stroke their chins like, oh, that is a good point. Multiculturalism helped them be a success on the Silk Road. I want success. Maybe multiculturalism is for me. Even if it's like just a couple historical documents that are really like liberally interpreted in a very odd way, it can work. So I hope that the people who are going to bat for our ideas, the people who are planning to engage in any sort of debate, are going to be ready for this nonsense. I mean, I would be worried about that. I don't want to debate. Oh my God, the crap that people can come up with. They need to have, anyone who plans on going to a debate needs to have their stuff in order to combat popular historical myths, but they also need to be sort of mentally prepared and ready to tackle crazy fringe historical interpretations, and also have some of their own unexpected historical facts, right? Things that are well documented but less known. And I say facts and well documented because while biased fact checkers do exist, and they're not going to interpret what we say in a kind light, it would be generally good to come out a fact check after a debate in semi-good light. I really don't want people to try and win debates by totally spinning fake stories, because it'll make us look intellectually dishonest. So again, if I was trying to red pill my family at the Thanksgiving table, I would generally avoid historical talk until people have warmed up to the principles, until the ideas. Now, if someone challenges you with a historical argument that you have to take on, well, just do it. Find the quickest way to end it. If someone says, oh, what you're saying is what the National Socialists believed, right? Because you said something vaguely racially inegalitarian. Now, you could point out polls, you could point out the fact that what you believe is in line with people who defeated the Axis, right? The men who defeated Germany were not racial egalitarians. They fought in a segregated army. They went home to their favorite white-only restaurants, and they protested against integrated schools. But really, you want to get someone to the point where they're open to the ideas, the principles. Once that happens, you can remind them that some of their favorite people, like the Founding Fathers, also believed those ideas. You can remind them that those ideas were fundamental to the history of every white country.